Hi, my name's Dan, and this video is one in a series of videos about blueprint scripting in Unreal. And in this one, I'm going to talk about functions. So the setup I've got is a third-person template map, and I've just got a simple blueprint here. There's an instance of it sitting in the world. If you've been following along the other videos in this series, this will be quite familiar to you. And inside this blueprint, I've got a pressure plate that you can stand on. It doesn't actually detect pressure because what it's got is a collision box bounding it, so that detects when the player stands on there. I don't need to do anything clever to make sure that it knows it's just the player, because the player is the only moving thing inside this world. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create and show you the use of a variable, not a variable, a function in the script. Now, I hope you've done some programming before, and if you have, you've probably come across this concept, which is to take some processing and package it up into a kind of nugget of processing that you can call over and over again, and in different circumstances. In some languages, this is called a function. In some, it's called a subroutine. In some, it's called a method. There are several other names for it, procedure. But it's all the same idea. Generally, is that rather than creating the same piece of code repeatedly, you encapsulate it in some way, and then you can call it repeatedly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function inside this blueprint class. It's going to do something really quite bizarre that you're not really going to want. Usually, this is one of the features of teaching people how to use programming at basic levels, is that you're often doing things for demonstration purposes that you wouldn't actually do in the flows of a real large programming project. But let's put that aside and let's get into it. So I'm going to create a function. The functions are here down on the left-hand side, and there's a construction script, which we're not bothered by, and there's a plus button. I'm going to create a new function. And this function that I'm going to create is going to take some text that we're going to give it. It's going to split it up into separate words, and it's going to print out each word separately, but it's going to do so in reverse order, just for cosmetic purposes. I did say it's something that you probably wouldn't really want to do. So here we are. We're going to call it reversing text. So the first thing that happens when we create that function is that we've got a new graph for the function, and it gives us a starting node, which is when execution comes into this function, this node is going to be executed. So if you've used functions in other languages, you're probably used to the idea that you can pass parameters or give information to this function. And in Unreal, this is no exception. You've got inputs. You've also got outputs. We're not actually going to use an output, but if you want outputs, you can. And one thing that's different in Unreal from some programming languages is that you can actually have multiple outputs. Most functions in textual language, you only get one value that can what's called returning from the function. So we're going to create an input here. We're just going to call this the text and change that to a string. So what's going to happen when we call this function is we're going to specify some text that's going to be in there. In fact, let's jump out of that function and show how we might call it. So we're going to do different things depending on whether the actor steps onto the plate or steps off the plate. We're going to call the function both times. So the way to call a function, we can just drag it across from the left-hand side there and let go. And it creates a node that will call the function. That then also has a target pin in here. Generally speaking, you're using target self, which means this object itself. And the text we're going to put in here is, we're going to pretend that this plate is a little bit fussy kind of character, and I'm going to say get off me. Let's just split that. Get off me. Exclamation mark. So when you step on, it says get off me. I'm just going to use Control C and Control V to create another copy of that note. And in this particular one, I'm going to say few. Let's leave out the comma. Few that better. Exclamation mark. Right. So when the function is called, what we want it to do is to take the text that's passed into it and take each word in turn from the end, going backwards. So we want this to take the word me, then off, then get, and print them to the screen separately. And because the text is printed to the screen, any new text is at the top before actually when it appears, it will be in the order that we expect to see it when we're normally reading from top to bottom. So it'll say get, and underneath that will be off, and underneath that will be me. So we can go back to the function. We can either do that by clicking on the tab up here, or in fact, if you double click on that, it takes you to the correct function. Once you've got lots of functions in your scripts, you might find it easier to do that double clicking to get in. So we want to do something with this text, and we're going to use a thing called split. But before we do that, we're actually going to store this as a local variable. Yes, I've created a variable coming to the class there, but you can create local variables inside a function which are only accessible to that function. So let's do that. And we're going to call this remainder, because we're going to cycle in a loop, and this is going to hold what's left of our text after we've printed out the last word. So we want to turn that into a string. The first thing we want to do when we enter this function is we're actually going to set that variable, the remainder, and start from there. Then we want to be splitting. So there is a function which is text split, and this takes some input here. So the source string, which is always going to be the remainder as we get it. This in string, it's a function that's going to search for a character or a set of characters that we're going to give it to look for splitting. And because we put spaces in between our words, if I just put a space in there, I know it's not so easy to see, then that will split on there. We're going to have ignore case, so it's that's not important for us, particularly because we're splitting on a space. And it says from start, but we're going to do it from the end, so that's going to reverse. So the first splitting point it's going to find is the last space in the string. So when we're saying get off me, that's the space between off and me. Okay. And what that does is it splits it into a left string and a right string. So the left string is the stuff before the space, and the right string is the stuff that's after the space. But also, we've got a Boolean return value here, which tells us if it's been successful, which is important to us, because we're going to do a branch based on that. So this is how we know when to stop trying to split the string, is when there's no more splits, it will come out false here, and we won't keep going around. So what we're going to do after the branch, we're going to display the right-hand string. So we're going to do print string, take that right hand. So in that first occasion, that's going to be the word me, and then the next time around, it's going to be the word off, when we've done a successful split. And then we want to take the left hand, which is the bit that's left over, and plug that into the remainder. So we'll take that left-hand string, make it the remainder. And then once we've done that, we want to loop back around. I'm just going to use a control flow loop here. There. Now, the one thing that it's not doing yet is when it's found that last space, that's fine. So it's going to print. First of all, it's going to say off. Sorry, me. Then it's going to say off, and then it's going to drop out because there's no more splits to happen. And finally, we want it to actually print out the get, which is the first word. So when this branch is false, we want the final thing, which is going to be to print string again. Print string. And it's when it fails, the only thing that you get out is the left-hand side. So that should do the final word that we want. Okay, the actual mechanics of how I'm splitting this string are not that important, to be honest, in terms of understanding what's happening with the function. What I'm really wanting to show you is that I can do different things depending on the input that we give into this function. And if we go back to the event graph, you can see the text for stepping on is get off me, and the text for stepping off is phew, that's better. Now, if I've done everything right, and I'm live programming, so there's always a chance that I've made a mistake, but if I've done it right, it should work as we expect. So if we step on, it says get off me. That is exactly what we wanted. Step off. Phew, that's better. Get off me. Phew, that's better. There we go. So that's running the function differently. One of those has got an extra space in there. That's interesting. But that's just in terms of the input string that I've put in. So that's how you can create a function and use it in Unreal. I'm just going to quickly point to something else here. Also on the left-hand side, there's a thing called macros. Macros are very, very similar to functions in Unreal. And at the sort of level that we're at, as we're working through these tutors, the differences are very little here. So you can use macros in similar ways to functions. There are some subtle differences between them. If in doubt, I would say generally you want to use a function rather than a macro. Okay, so that's it from me for now.